Things just took a crazy turn on Married to Medicine. And believe me when I say this is the kind of drama you need to see. In the newest season, the deception, backstabbing, and hush-hush alliances have hit an all-time high. We've witnessed the aftermath of Gregory and King's tense interactions during their couple's retreat moments that were meant to stay private, but ended up blowing up for everyone to see. What was initially planned as a peaceful getaway for couples quickly turned into the kind of explosion no one saw coming. Everything kicked off looking calm. The group was all laughs, chatter, and good vibes until the underlying friction between Dr. Gregory and King began to bubble up. For weeks leading up to the trip, there had been murmurs about trouble in their relationship, but no one thought it would erupt the way it did. The confrontation came out of left field. This wasn't your average disagreement. Gregory completely lost his cool. A conversation that should have stayed behind closed doors spiraled into a fiery showdown. The tension was thick, like the whole room froze in place. Things escalated fast, and before anyone could catch their breath, Gregory pushed it even further by officially filing a report. He didn't just walk away or try to de-escalate the situation, he made a formal move. That's when it hit everyone. This wasn't a minor blow-up. It was a full-on betrayal unfolding in real time. But the mess didn't end there. As the group took sides, Sweet Tea ended up completely sidelined. She landed smack in the middle of the chaos, and to make matters worse, her longtime friend Quad began pulling away. Following Gregory's report, the entire vibe started to shift, and Sweet Tea was one of the first to feel the impact. Quad began questioning Sweet Tea's loyalty, and that put a major strain on their friendship. Sweet Tea's isolation was impossible to miss. It was like she'd been dropped in the eye of a storm she never asked for. But the most painful part wasn't just losing Quad, it was what happened with the new friend Sweet Tea had started to trust. On the surface, Mimi seemed like a true supporter, someone who'd be in Sweet Tea's corner no matter what. But as things unfolded, it became clear that Mimi wasn't exactly who she appeared to be. It wasn't just the rift with Quad. Sweet Tea was hit with another betrayal, and this one cut even deeper. Sweet Tea believed Mimi was her ride or die. But what she didn't realize was that Mimi had already switched lanes. In the beginning, Mimi was all encouragement and kind words, promising to be there through thick and thin. But slowly, that support turned into side eyes and sarcasm. The warmth between them started to fade, leaving Sweet Tea with yet another cold shoulder. Then, once the cameras started rolling, Mimi began to actively undercut Sweet Tea. It felt almost like the producers handed her a storyline, and Mimi stepped right into the role, turning on Sweet Tea for all the cameras to catch. The betrayal came across like a punch to the gut, and you could see just how deeply it affected Sweet Tea. What looked like a simple friendship quickly revealed itself as a strategic move by Mimi, leaving Sweet Tea to deal with the emotional wreckage. She was already feeling alone, but it was when Draven Lee stayed quiet during Sweet Tea's toughest moments that the real sting of betrayal set in. Draven Lee had always been one to take a stand, whether that meant backing someone up or calling them out. But this time, she stayed completely silent. Sweet Tea, who had counted on her for support, was left wide open to the group's harsh judgment. The very woman who had once been a mentor and a trusted friend suddenly went ghost, and Sweet Tea was left to face everything on her own. And the drama? It didn't just stay on the show. Sweet Tea was now battling with the audience. The aftermath of the couple's retreat and the breakdown of her friendships didn't just live within the show's walls. Fans of Married to Medicine rushed to social media to air their thoughts, and Sweet Tea became a magnet for criticism. As public opinion began to shift, she found herself in the center of a storm, attacked not just by fans, but also by some of her fellow castmates. The wave of negativity didn't let up. The support she once felt around her vanished almost overnight. The backlash got so overwhelming that Sweet Tea couldn't escape the flood of hateful comments and cruel feedback. To many, she suddenly became the villain, and the more she tried to explain her side, the more people accused her of being overly dramatic. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the producers were working overtime against her. Key scenes were cut, and her version of events was left on the editing floor. It became painfully obvious that the producers had already chosen the story they wanted to tell, and Sweet Tea didn't fit into that vision. Instead of offering the full story, they edited things to paint her as even more alone. By twisting the narrative to make her seem like the constant source of conflict, The producers pushed harder when Sweet Tea wouldn't give them the breakdown moment they were angling for. But she wasn't about to play into their hands. That refusal to break down on cue only made her more of a target. Sweet Tea stood her ground, and in doing so, challenged the storyline they were so desperate to sell. She became a problem for the producers, who made sure to cut her out in every way possible. Her side of the story, her version of the events, was hidden, and Sweet Tea was depicted in the worst possible light, with all odds stacked against her. But instead of staying quiet, Sweet Tea decided to take matters into her own hands. She flipped the script by taking to social media to share her side of the story. Sweet Tea wasn't about to let the producers dictate her narrative, especially with public opinion already turned against her. She used the very platform that had been weaponized against her to take back control of her narrative. Going live, posting videos, and engaging directly with her fans, Sweet Tea revealed the truth. She didn't hold anything back. Sweet Tea opened up about how the producers had manipulated the footage and how much of her reality had been twisted for the sake of drama. She took charge of her own story and began to rebuild her relationship with her fans, offering them the unfiltered truth they hadn't seen on screen. Her live videos were raw and authentic, providing fans with a look behind the scenes. This direct connection allowed Sweet Tea to reconnect with those who had begun to doubt her. By speaking out, Sweet Tea flipped the script, taking control of her story in a way no one expected. But Sweet Tea was facing more than just the producers. Mimi wasn't done yet. Mimi wasn't going to let Sweet Tea clear her name that easily. She doubled down, planting more rumors to make sure Sweet Tea stayed in the hot seat. As if things weren't bad enough already, Mimi launched an attack, spreading false stories and rumors about Sweet Tea to keep the drama going. Sweet Tea had only just started to reclaim her narrative, but Mimi wasn't about to let her off the hook. Instead of letting the truth come to light, Mimi kept pushing more lies, hoping to squash Sweet Tea's chances of coming out on top. The more Sweet Tea fought back, the harder Mimi worked to manipulate the situation and keep Sweet Tea on the defensive. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore, it became about making sure Sweet Tea stayed the villain in everyone's eyes. The rumors spread like wildfire, further turning public opinion against Sweet Tea. It felt as though Mimi was playing a game of chess, making strategic moves and creating distractions at every turn. Sweet Tea made a move to clear her name, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Having been through worse, she saw this as just another round in the battle. Then everything changed when Sweet Tea was blindsided by something no one saw coming. A private conversation that Sweet Tea hadn't even known was being recorded finally came to light. And the twist was more damaging than anyone could have anticipated. It was a move that could only be described as calculated. Someone had secretly recorded Sweet Tea, capturing her private thoughts and discussions. But the real bombshell came when the recording was edited and presented to the world in a way that completely twisted her words. In the recording, Sweet Tea appeared to say things that made her look like the ultimate villain, the very kind of person she had fought so hard not to become. At the time, she had no idea those words were being used to tear her down. It was clear that whoever had recorded her wanted to expose her at her lowest point, making it impossible for Sweet Tea to escape the damage caused by the edited version. Even though she hadn't done anything wrong, the recording made her seem like someone entirely different. But even with all the evidence stacked against her, Sweet Tea wasn't going to let the world define her. She walked into the final cast event, determined to confront everyone who had been working against her, and she wasn't holding anything back. At this point, she had nothing to lose. Sweet Tea knew this was her last chance to stand up for herself, and she wasn't about to let the lies and betrayal slide any longer.